What is the first word you think of when I mention the words Alzheimer's disease? If your mind went straight to memory, then you're not wrong about that. Patients typically misplace their personal belongings, forget upcoming appointments, and get lost in familiar neighborhoods. What if I also told you that Alzheimer's disease goes beyond memory and can affect language too? Patients may begin to use simpler words, their sentences may be shorter, and most notably, they experience word-finding difficulties. They may struggle to remember the names of common objects, the names of famous celebrities, and words would be at the tip of their tongue. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced word-finding difficulties before. Have you ever been able to talk about many movies an actor has been in, except that you can't find the name of that actor? Me too. And Google always bails me out. For us, we don't give these instances a second thought. But for people with Alzheimer's disease, it's a constant struggle that affects their daily lives. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Alzheimer's disease is becoming a growing public health concern worldwide. Currently, 772,000 Canadians have been diagnosed with dementia, with numbers expected to increase to 1.7 million by 2050. The increase in prevalence will surely increase caregiver burden and healthcare costs in the next 2.5 decades. This really emphasizes the urgent need for early detection strategies to diagnose and intervene as early as possible. In Alzheimer's disease, every day counts. The earlier the treatment, the better the outcome. And so researchers have tried to tackle this issue by following healthy individuals with a family history of Alzheimer's disease. Many countries around the world have created cohorts to track these individuals for years, performing annual clinical assessments to measure their cognitive status and track their progression. And what they found is that some of these individuals have characteristic amyloid and tau buildup in their brains long before they've developed any symptoms. Now, these are sticky proteins that develop in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease that slowly damage the brain due to its toxicity. Now, there are many ways to detect these proteins. For several years, the only way we could measure this was after a person had passed away, where a doctor would carefully examine the brain and look at these plaques and tangles under a microscope. But for early detection purposes, waiting until someone passes away, not really helpful. And so, as technology has advanced, researchers have developed ways to detect these proteins in living people. And so they can now be detected using a PET scan, where a tracer would have to be injected into your bloodstream, and then that tracer would travel up to your brain and then stick to these plaques and tangles to make them light up. And with the help of a powerful scanner, we can visualize where these proteins are building up in the brain. They can also be detected by measuring the amount of circulating amyloid in your spinal fluid, which would be extracted from someone using a needle, and that's definitely not on anyone's bucket list. If you have less circulating amyloid in your spinal fluid, then that means there's more amyloid building up in your brain, which is bad. A big breakthrough in recent years has been the move towards blood-based measures, but these tests are not widely available yet. And the tests that are widely available can be quite costly, invasive, and less accessible. And so early detection mostly depends on patients going to their doctors when they first start noticing subtle changes in their cognition or memory. The catch here, though, is that if these patients were to be objectively assessed by their doctors, they would have perfect or near perfect scores. And this is known as subjective cognitive decline. A lot of them will have memory complaints, which have been linked to Alzheimer's disease biomarkers and an increased risk to progress to the first stage of Alzheimer's disease. But just as many people, if not more, complain about having word-finding difficulties as well, and yet it's largely unexplored in the context of Alzheimer's disease. A paper from my lab began to link word-finding difficulties with Alzheimer's disease. Using data from a cohort called the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, Participants completed a self-report questionnaire called the Everyday Cognition Questionnaire, and it included 2 items on word-finding difficulties amongst others. It asked them to rate how often they have a specific complaint compared to 10 years ago. And what they found was striking. Participants who reported more difficulty forgetting the names of objects had significantly less amyloid in their spinal fluid compared to participants who reported little to no difficulty forgetting the names of objects. And so these findings set the stage for my thesis project, where it was up to me to show that these results were not due to chance. And so I set out to extend these findings across 3 different cohorts, using PET amyloid instead of spinal fluid amyloid because I wanted to confirm these results using another gold standard measure. And I was able to replicate these findings across all 3 cohorts, one with a sample size of 644 people, the second with a sample size of 219 people, and the third with a sample size of 160 people. There is a problem, though. We now know that word-finding difficulties may be predictive of Alzheimer's disease, but what we don't know is how severe these complaints need to be for it to actually matter. Also, these 2 studies only included 2 questions on word-finding difficulties, which may not be sufficient to capture or measure this phenomenon. And so this brings me to the second part of my thesis project, where I developed a new word-finding difficulty questionnaire for cognitively unimpaired older adults at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. To comprehensively assess word-finding difficulties, my questionnaire was broken down into 3 different sections. If they think they experience word-finding difficulties, what kinds of word-finding difficulties they think they experience, and its impacts on their daily and social lives. My questionnaire was reviewed by speech-language pathologists to ensure that it's clear, concise, and that we didn't miss anything. We then validated the questionnaire by sending it to participants in the cohort called Prevent AD, which is located here in Montreal at the Douglas Research Center, where my lab is. And their responses helped refine my questionnaire by identifying which items were most meaningful and removing any items that weren't endorsed. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, oh my gosh, I have word-finding difficulties. Should I be worried? And this is exactly the question we're trying to answer. Forgetting words is very normal. You could just be stressed, anxious, or sleep-deprived. However, as you get older, these may start to become more significant depending on how frequent and distressing it is. One thing is clear, though. Clinicians shouldn't be dismissing it as lightly as they have been doing and attributing it to aging. In the words of someone from my lab, if your dog suddenly starts barking, it could be because there's a squirrel outside your window and you might be tempted to ignore it. But if your dog keeps barking for long enough, then you're going to want to get up and check what your dog is barking at. And word-finding difficulties are no different. They could be nothing, but they could also be worth a closer look. And that's what we want our questionnaire to help with, sorting out who needs more tests and who doesn't. The ultimate goal of our questionnaire isn't for it to be a standalone diagnostic tool. That would be nearly impossible to pull off, at least in the short term. Instead, we want it to be a first-line screening tool, something that prompts clinicians to dig deeper with additional tests and scans, something that raises red flags for clinicians. It's also important to preface that I have been using large-scale data to predict the outcome of one person. And once we gather more data and determine a threshold score, we'll be able to more confidently answer this question. In the meantime, word-finding difficulties shouldn't be brushed aside. They could be signals from the brain that could give us a chance to act sooner. Word-finding difficulties could be Alzheimer's disease opening move, but noticing it could be ours. Thank you.